Okay, now it's time to start the session 3. So can you please get seated? So the next and last session will be divided into three panels. And the first panel will concern drug discovery and AI, the second clinical trials and AI, and the third one, human-computer interaction. I will first introduce my co-moderator, Elazar Edelman, who is the director of the Institute for Medical Engineering and Science at MIT and professor of medicine at Harvard. Elazar.
Many thanks, Bernard, and thank you to all of you for a wonderful discussion today. This session is going to be on drug development. Drug development goes back to the very early parts of human civilization. In ancient times, drugs were part of religious and spiritual healing. But it was only recently that pharmacology and theology parted. And it's only recently that physicians and pharmacists, rather than sages and religious leaders, give drugs. So the transformation requires somehow that validation be something other than belief. It has to be based in science. And up until now, that validation has been by trial and error, observations of what happens when people ingest or animals are given drugs. That's a method that is fraught with complications and expense. It's restricted in its inclusion, and it's limited in its predictive value. And so the question is that as artificial intelligence and machine learning advances, how might we use this new lingua franca to optimize drug development and evaluation? We're very pleased and proud and honored to have with us three esteemed leaders in the field. You've already heard from Professor Celli. We'll have Professor Riftegar Nizami from Brigham and Women's Hospital and Dr. Nicholas Dohue, the co-founder and chief AI officer at ICTOS. So Nicholas, if you'll start us off, and then I'll pass it. And I mentioned. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Hey, thanks everyone. Trying to share my screen. Oh, great, working. Okay, hi everyone. So yes, I'm Nicolas Dohue, CTO, ex-CAIO of ICTOS. So it's a French startup based in Paris. Yeah, it's okay. French startup based in Paris. So welcome in Paris, everyone. So we'll be talking about drug discovery. So at ICTOS, we provide artificial intelligence technologies for medicinal chemistry to accelerate this process of new drug discovery. And here I'm talking about small drugs and the kind of drug you can find in a pharmacy. This is a very long and costly process. It takes like 10 to 15 years to find a new drug. And it's very costly. It's around $1 to $2 billion to find a new drug because you have to take into account the failure rates. And at ICTOS, so we help chemists design new drugs. You have to have in mind that drugs are not something you can find in nature. I mean, the drug we're talking about here. So they are designed by people. And it's very complicated because the amount of possible chemical compound that can become a drug is huge. It's 10 to the 60, the amount of atoms you can find in 1,000 cents. So it's a very complex endeavor. And also, when you try to find a new drug, you try to find something that will reach the specification of a project, which is 15 to 20 objectives at the same time. So you have to have in mind what kind of a Rubik's Cube with 10, 20 faces, and you try to solve that. So each time you you find one phase, you destroy another one. So and you try to iterate and to move to make your project move. So in a typical project, Nancy talked about that, talking about 1063. I think that's the name of the company. So it told her that they find a new hit. So that's the very beginning of a project. You try to find a molecule with the beginning of an activity on a specific target, but then you need to improve the activity. You need to make this molecule non-toxic, soluble, etc., etc. So it takes a long time. So how AI can help? In medicinal chemistry, you do what is called a design, make, test cycle. So you do trial and error. You design new compound. You try to make them because we don't have 3D printers for molecules. You need to use the rules of organic chemistry to make them. And then you make them, you test them, and you iterate. You have data coming in. And then you explore the data and say, okay, this works, this doesn't work, and what are the next molecule I will make. So here, when we talk about data, this is not health data. We're not talking about patient data. We are in biological tests, physiochemical tests, or tests on cells. So no, we just deal with data, the IP of the pharma companies. So here in that design, make, test cycle, we use AI or machine learning to predict the activity of the molecules. If you have a good predictor, you don't have to synthesize and test the compound. And we also use generative modeling. So it's a branch of AI where AI is not here to predict something or to recognize a face or things like that, but to create data, to try to imagine, let's say, a sound, an image, and hear a chemical structure. We also use reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning, the fact that you have data, and you will use that data to make the new iteration be better than the previous. We also use AI in virtual screening. So it's in the first step, hit discovery, you will try to screen a big database of compound. And here again, AI can help to try to find hits more efficiently. AI is also very successful in simulations because predictors are good, but they suffer of a problem called activity cliffs because structures that are very similar can have different activities. So you need to use 3D or 4D simulations to have better signal for reinforcement. And then you need to make those molecules. And AI a few years ago came with a very good algorithm to find those roots. Algorithm called retrosynthesis. So you start with a compound, and AI, very similar to the one that beat the World Championship of Go at DeepMind, were used to do retrosynthesis. And next, AI can also be used in the lab to automatize the lab using robots. So I will conclude on that. Chemistry is really a realm where AI can express all its power to try to accelerate a process which is at the moment driven by humans with their brains and with their hands. And I'm really sure that in the near future, we will have automated AI-driven projects in pharma companies.
Thank you. I think what we'll do is go to the next speaker and then open this up for questions. So, Professor Celli, we could have the next set of slides, please.
And do I have a clicker? Thank you. I'm going to be focusing on drug repurposing, which is trying to look for new therapeutic indications apart from the ones that the drug has been approved for. And of course, this accelerates the process since the drug already has had dosing and safety studies. And a lot of groups are using claims, registry, and electronic health record data for drug repurposing. And there has been some examples of successful drug repurposing. For example, metformin is being used for several cancers. Thalidomide is now part of the armamentarium for multiple myeloma. Linezolid was an antidepressant first before it became an antibiotic. But there are some caveats that we need to consider when we're using claims, registry, and EHR data for drug repurposing or for other modeling in general. The first is that when you're using claims and registry data, you have to be aware that there are missing information. So this is a paper from our group just a week ago that showed that the relationship between the features and the outcome of interest would change depending on how much confounding you're able to adjust for. And we were able to get very different effect sizes when we compared an analysis using a claims database versus an analysis using an electronic health record database. You've heard a lot about bias, and I don't think we've spent enough time to understand bias because bias is such a huge term. And the first type of bias that I wanted to point out that hasn't been emphasized enough is that artificial intelligence has an expiration date. The accuracy of an artificial intelligence algorithm is bounded by space and time. You may have validated your algorithm in 100 hospitals, but it doesn't mean that it's going to work for the 101st hospital. It's also bound by time. Your model might be accurate now, but 2 or 3 years from now, or even shorter than that, there will be a deterioration in the performance of your model. And I think we don't emphasize that enough. That bias lurks in unimaginable ways. And this is the reason why we need multiple pairs of eyes performing this causal inference analysis, performing this machine learning analysis for drug repurposing or other purposes. For example, we would assume that similar patients receive similar treatments, and you're able to tease out the association between a certain treatment and an outcome. But what we found here is that different patients with sepsis have different outcomes depending on which hospital they were admitted to in the United States. Another source of bias would be the concordance in the sex and in the race ethnicity between the provider and the patients. We found that women, for example, have better outcomes if they were operated on by female surgeons compared to male surgeons. And we did not see this with male patients. So what happens now if you throw all that data into an autoencoder or transformer? How are you able to now to come up with some prediction model if there's such biases that exist in your database? And then the one of the more important sources of bias that has become more prominent now in the media is the fact that the technology that we're using in the front lines of care may in fact be biased. So there has been a lot of discussion about pulse oximetry performing differently. So a pulse oximeter of 90% may be different if you're white or you're Black or you're Hispanic. And they found the same thing with thermometry. So any technology that uses infrared sensing would be very sensitive to the skin color. And we think that this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're very concerned that the wearables, which are increasingly being used for clinical trials as well as clinical care, might be biased against people who were not part of the test subjects. And typically those are middle-aged white individuals. And so the key message here is, yes, there are ample opportunities for AI to be used in drug repurposing, but we have to be very aware of the biases that exist in the data because they will definitely affect the prediction and the optimization and the classification that you're going to do. We want to move on from AI research that is arrogant and ignorant to AI research that is accountable and inclusive. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I think you've heard two ends of a spectrum of where AI is. Arrogant and ignorant and not yet ready for prime time, or entirely able to change the face of drug discovery. So I think for the next 10, 12 minutes, it would be worth discussing this tension of where we are and how we move beyond it. And so, Professor Nizami, perhaps you can tell us, is there a middle road that we can drive down to avoid crashing into the guardrails on either side?
Sure. So the concept is very simple. We have a target that we need to attack, and we use some sort of a little compound, and we just need to narrow down, as Nicholas was saying, from 10 to the power of 20 or 10 to the power of 60 down to a handful, limited number of compounds, and then we need to optimize it in terms of the terms of action, the properties that lead needs to have, right? And that optimization for the lead, which is the final step, which actually shows the efficacy of the drug, and there comes the toxicity, there comes the affinity, like how good it can bind and stuff, is a very multi-parameter optimization problem, right? So what AI claims to do in this make, design, and test circle is actually to limit the number of compounds in the first place, and then come up with a limit with numbers, a number of compounds that you can start your reinforced learning, and then also learn from the experiments and biochemists in terms of their input to enrich the pool of that optimization decision-making procedure. So what we are missing here, though, is the physics. At the end of the day, we want to deliver such a drug. So in my opinion, when we are talking about AI in medicine, what we are missing out is some sort of the footprint or input into that optimization loop from the physics of the delivery of the drug. And that is important because in a lot of cases, the compound is not toxic. The compound is efficient. It binds. The problem becomes that it doesn't serve the need that it was designed for. I'm talking about my own expertise with the stents. I have spent my whole academic life on stents. When it came to the discussion of covering the stents to have a local delivery for the drug was a known drug. Paclitaxel is used for cancer as well. But where they wanted to deliver that drug at the site of atherosclerosis, the problem was, did we consider the discussion about the hydrophobicity or hydrophilicity? Did we discuss about the transport of the release kinetics of such a drug? So that's where actually the physical modeling, these days is a very hot topic, physics-informed neural networks can help. And that's where it can feed the AI with extra parameters for the terms of action and mechanistic functionality of the drug, where you can use those insights into your multi-parameter optimization loop, and then you come up with better outcomes.
Thank you, Farhad. So if I understand you correctly, what you're suggesting is that if we borrow from deep science, we can move AI out of the realm of magic. How would you respond to that, Leo?
I just want to, because we always get this pushback from people who are doubters of AI, is that AI needs to follow mechanistic models in medicine. And I wanted to point out that a lot of our mechanistic models in medicine is highly biased, and we're just discovering that now, because mechanistic models are also based on data, are also based on observations, whether on animals or people. And of course, there will be some issues there when we're trying to represent that in a mathematical formula. So I don't think that there's an easy answer. I still am quite optimistic that AI would play a role in drug repurposing, but we just have to be very careful. We just have to do this with all the caveats in front of us so that we're aware that if we find a new drug for obesity, that it's not only going to work for one demographic, because in the data set that we use, there were not a lot of representations from indigenous populations. So everything has to be looked at with a health equity lens. I think that that's the message that we wanted you to take home. And if you don't do that, I think we will be caught off guard that AI is going to be perpetuating any problems that we have now.
But I do think that you're not suggesting that we wait until we know everything and for us to proceed.
Not at all, because the status quo, as you all know, is not perfect. I always tell people who are listening to me at this point, try not to get sick, because there's a lot of uncertainties in how we make decisions. There's a lot of bias. And so we need to move fast, because we want to replace subjective biased decisions with much more objective, much more data substantiated decisions.
Well, thank you. So Nicholas, I'd ask you a specific question, and that is, you've heard this discussion, but on the other end of the spectrum, aren't we in AI in a situation where we could be fooling ourselves if the data training set becomes the data test set, and we don't have the luxury of waiting 5, 10 years for outcomes, and we're relying on retrospective data, which, as you've heard, may be biased? How does one ever validate in real time or in quick time AI algorithm?
Okay, AI in chemistry, as I explained it, is like 5 years old. So quite recent. And as I said, discovering a new drug can take 10 years. So, okay, we don't have today a drug that we can buy and can treat you that are AI drugs in terms of chemistry. But several drugs are now in clinical tests. So I believe that in few years, there will be AI-driven discovery project that will be, with molecules that will be in the market. That's, for me, that's for sure. And I agree that there is a distinction between trying to solve the multi-parametric optimization in medicinal chemistry and the biology. At Ictos, when we engage in a project, the biology is already done. I mean, the assays, the tests we are provided by the pharma company. We're not involved in this. And for sure, we can, on the paper, have a perfect molecule for the prime that they gave us, but maybe it's a wrong target and it won't work. So, I mean, here we try to optimize an industrial process, which is how to, like making a plane, you have a specification and you try to make it fly, and then adding seats inside of them and increase, the cargo hold. And that process in chemistry is really human driven. And I think here AI can really help.
Sir, all this being said, how do you expect to shorten the time of discovery and development of a drug from the biochemical process to the clinical application? So in the next panel, we will discuss clinical trials. So the aim of my question is not to discuss clinical. How do you think it can be shortened? And consequently, when do you expect to have on the market the first AI discovered drugs?
Okay, so I think in 5 to 8 years, we have one. Okay, I'm recorded. Okay, so I think yes. Maybe not ours, but other companies are working on that, and they are working working great. And I think we need to. I think this is the same revolution, industrial revolution we had in the car industry, automatization of the process. I think in the future we will have some kind of a Tesla factory for drugs, something like that, something that can be really driven by AI with design, make, and test, automatize, and that will very shorten that design cycle and optimization cycles.
I want to comment on something. especially hearing from Professor Chellis, the idea of having doubts on the physical modeling. There is this joke I keep repeating that the experiment everyone believes except the one who did it, and numerical simulation no one believes except the one who actually ran the code or wrote the code. Here, the problem, and I think the golden word in drug discovery is the perspective. We want to design or discover a new drug in the perspective of clinical trials. The experiment we are doing for preclinical tests are happening in the most convenient environment that technology allows us to do. So actually, we are not able to still find a map or distribution. The methods we're using, mass spec, we are just having a lump sum of the drug as a whole, as a volume. We are not still able to find a distribution and the map. All right. So when the experiments are happening in a very with the limitation of the feasibility, and we are trying to find the key outside because there is a light there, and while we have lost the key in our house, that's the issue with the drug delivery and drug discovery. So what these mechanistic modeling, constitutive modeling that are not actually biased, because AI allows to study the whole area of variability and uncertainty. So AI actually is not against the drug discovery or physical modeling. It helps the physical modeling, but it just offers confinement, because the problem of drug delivery is extremely, extremely big to handle experimentally.
And what do you think about the risk of using AI not to develop the drugs to be efficient against disease, but to develop toxic drugs and giving the privilege to toxicity? Is there a risk, and how can this be controlled?
Yes, absolutely. That there is a risk, and some papers show that using those technology, yes, you can make poisons, and I mean, a drug is not a poison in a way. So yes, I think we need to be very careful and to make sure that at one point those technologies are controlled, yes, by our institutions, because you have codes now on internet and you can do that. Yeah, I think that there's a risk. Yeah.
So we have 2.5 minutes. Are there any questions from the audience? Nobody? Yes, please. Hit click.
It seems that pharmaceutical companies have not been able, even the largest one, to develop, for the moment, decent capabilities in deploying these technologies for drug discovery. Is there a major cultural problem? Why is that? Why do they absolutely need to rely on startups which were built relatively rapidly with viable size investment? So why isn't the pharmaceutical industry able to build these skills internally?
Okay, yeah, it's working. It depends. Okay, there are in every market you have early adopters. Take AstraZeneca, for example. They invest a lot. They have a big team of data scientists, AI engineers, and they don't need anyone to do that. They publish papers, the same papers we do, and MIT, the same paper that NIT, and you have some early adopters because of the data they have. A company like Janssen are data-driven pharmaceutical companies, and they invested in AI with external research and internal research because they have data. Other company, you're right, don't really believe in that because maybe they are old school, and maybe also the weights of the chemist inside the company can do a big difference, because in a way we're not trying to replace a chemist, but in a way chemists can feel that we try to replace them. And And there is a bias in their mind when they test AI. They try to push to AI the more complex problems and to be able to say, it's not working, and you're right. There is a change management, but during the last 5 years, we saw a big difference, a big inflection in that way, and everyone now try to use AI to do so.
So this could go on as all the discussion for a long time. We'll thank the speakers and go on to the second panel. Thank the two of you.
Can the speakers of panel 2 come on the stage? Okay, the panel 2 is dedicated to the potential added value of AI on clinical trials. So you all know that clinical trials, in particular phase 3 trials, are the golden standard to demonstrate the benefit of a drug or clinical strategy. The problem is that they are very complicated. They need the recruitment of many patients, because now we are looking for small differences between experimental group and control group, and they are very expensive. And so the question is whether AI can help to find a solution for this problem. So we have very expert panelists for this, and to deal with this question, Stéphanie Alassonnière, who is professor at the University of Paris and associate professor at the École Polytechnique, Jean-Yves Blais, who is professor of oncology and director of the Léon Bérard Anti-Cancer Center in Lyon and president of Unicancer, Leo, whom you know already, and Ozana Meyerles, who is the surgeon director of the AI lab at MGH and associate professor at Harvard. So I think Stephanie started.
Yes. So the question was, what do clinicians need for their clinical trials? I'm not a clinician, so this is weird for me to start. But actually, as a mathematician, what I can say is what we can do for them. The first thing we are able to do now is the digital twins. So imagine you have sufficient data, longitudinal data on a population, and you can draw something like the picture you have for kids for their growth and height respect to their age. Okay, so you all know about that picture, the age of the baby, well, the children, and how high this baby is a long time. But we can do the same with much more complex data going from clinical, biological quantities to images. And so we are able to produce these trajectories so that when you have a new patient coming in, you can say that this patient is from one or the other category. So it's a better stratification so that you are able to classify the patient who will respond theoretically better than for some molecule to some other. And you will be also able to anticipate what's going to happen in a few years, as you would do for a child when you say, well, he's going to be taller than me in, let's say, 5 years. We do exactly the same thing now with models, with statistical models and machine learning. So we are now able to better select and anticipate the diagnosis so that we can help trying to do the recruitment to perform a better recruitment in terms of persons and in terms of time window. Second thing that we can do also is to produce new data, completely artificial ones, fake patients that are from a category of people that you are looking at. So imagine you have a cohort, a small one, sufficiently small that the tests are not significant enough. Then you can augment this data set in a way that you are now able to have some performance that are much better. And the interesting thing is that since we do have many clinical trials with control arms, we will be able to enhance this population and use these fake people for control arms in new clinical trials. So basically, we have two ways of helping for the clinicians with clinical trials, better selecting in terms of patient and time window, and increasing the population so that we will finally see the difference between the groups.
Thank you. This was very clear. Jean-Yves Blake.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I think physicians need a lot from artificial intelligence. And maybe among the different things which are absolutely crucial, I think I would like to quote four. Maybe the first one is to improve the accuracy in diagnosis. When we are doing clinical trial in oncology, it's particularly important to have an accurate diagnosis. We know that in some disease, and this is a growing proportion of neoplastic disease, diagnostic is complicated. Diagnostic can be erroneous, and this goes up to 30% in some cancer types. And this is something which can be definitively helped with artificial intelligence. And we have seen that from example for rare cancer, where slide review by the pathologist was actually very much helped by a review of the slides, which was organized with an artificial intelligence model. And this would help tremendously the accuracy of inclusion of patients into clinical trial. In particular, at a moment where nosological classification in oncology are very much changing, where we have a growing proportion of very small niches of disease, which are defined by by molecular alteration, which are rare, and therefore gather a small number of patients. This fragmentation has been seen in many cancer types. Lung cancer is particularly well known for that, but all cancers are affected with that. Defining and identifying those patients is very much a challenge. So putting patients into clinical trials which take 10 or 15 years is meaningless. We need to be faster than that. And to be faster than that, we need to be able to screen population to identify better those patients. I think here we have some example, including recent publications from some groups showing that the capacity to screen using image-based deep learning to screen for the presence of given molecular alteration to guide patient treatment can be quite useful, and it could be able to facilitate the process. The third one is, how can we not do clinical trials when they are going to be irrelevant? It's very costly to do phase 3 studies. A lot of phase 3 studies are inconclusive. Predicting from the current state of the art, from the published evidence that such randomized trial that we think is very smart is going to be either infeasible or negative at the end, would be tremendously helpful for the team of physicians which would need a lot of resources to gather patients, to follow patients for years, decades sometimes, to get an appropriate answer. It would be also very useful to have this type of information to stop quickly a trial which is going to be negative, as well as to be toxic for some patient population. And this, for that, I think artificial intelligence could sometimes probably be very helpful. And finally, the fourth one is, which is probably the most complex, is that these new technologies need to be accepted by the reimbursement bodies, by the health authorities, in order for us to be able to do meaningful clinical research, which means, if positive, being applied to the patient in routine. We all have methods to approve or to reimburse or not to reimburse a specific medication, and that's perfectly acceptable. These type of tools are moving extremely rapidly. I think the meeting of today is shows that quite clearly, and we need to have the health authorities being able to cope and to adapt a strategy of evaluation to the emergence of these new tools. And this is really an important matter, because otherwise we'll not be able to develop many medications in many patient subgroups, and therefore we'll be lagging behind in terms of precision medicine for cancer. So these are four of the examples where artificial intelligence could certainly serve.
Thank you, Jean-Yves.
I need a clicker. The slide for my presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much. You guys load my presentation, please. Thank you. So first, I would like to thank all the organizers and the academies for having here today. It's a huge pleasure and honor to be speaking on a topic that's so important to our professions. When I'm talking about surgical AI clinical trials, it's from the concept to implementation because it's such a new field that we haven't even started exploring yet. So just to put into context, there has been many revolutions in surgery in the last 200 years. General anesthesia, antiseptic surgery, endoscopic procedures in the 1960s, where we started doing a lot of robotics, inception, and plus endoscopic and laparoscopic surgery. And what happened is now we're living through a cognitive computing revolution within surgery, mainly leveraged by AI. And we're getting so many data sources, such as hardware, softwares, the human operators, imagine the video, and among all the other factors. But one thing that's really key to this revolution for surgery is the generation of surgical video. What I'm going to show here is just one experiment I have done already, and it's been very successful to looking about deviation of a outcome of an operation in a real time. So the video that's playing, well, should be playing. No, the video in the center. This is the MGH logo there. There's a video.
Vous pouvez lancer la vidéo, s'il vous plaît.
Yes, okay, so what is this? It's like, is a visual representation of a log probability of the right course of the events are occurring in a timely fashion of a procedure that's called laparoscopic sleeve gastrectomy. And as it happens, the machines make predictions of the next steps. The very first case showing here was a normal representation, which we call the surgical fingerprint. So that's a normal surgical fingerprint that you can see on the left side of the graph. When the second case happens, the patient had an open procedure before, and therefore has some adhesions between the omentum and the abdominal wall. Therefore, the machine becomes with hectic predictions and end up like developing, producing a abnormal surgical fingerprint, detecting the deviation of the course of the operation. But again, this is experimental and just to see what we could potentially do. But before getting there, we have to understand there is so many limitations. The limitations from, for example, embedded bias, forgetting, lack of explainability, lack of common sense, those are all implicit to AI itself. But then you have the human factors as well, such as the data, the limited access that we have to the data in this day and age, all the regulations around, the bias on the data that's being broadly discussed to start this meeting. Clinicians and researchers, they have limited time. They need to produce academically and also, to generate RVUs so they can pay their bills. And there was a lot of cultural pressure behind this. Industry always looking for the minimal viable product, not actually the product that's going to be helping the patient right away. And the patients, all the privacy concerns and the relationship with the clinician, those are in question. So we have solutions for that. And what we have been developing over time, the last 4 or 5 years, is the creation of a model for sustainability and scalability of surgical artificial intelligence. And it's divided in 3 pieces. One is the foundational work, where will be standards for data, standards for the annotation of the data, and standards for the governance of this data use. The creation of video acquisition platforms and frameworks that allow us to manipulate the data since it's being generated until it's the instructions. And as importantly, the knowledge dissemination, creation dissemination through publications and sharing knowledge. The data wouldn't exist wasn't for the interaction between the clinician, the patient, the researcher, the industry. And furthermore, surrounded by all these spheres of governance, oversight, and ethics committees. We identified that the data has its own structure, it should be standardized. It has its users, going from the patient to the clinician, to the insurer, to the hospital, to the developers. And all of this gives us opportunity to do some exploration on this data. It takes us also to the implementation and creation of a surgical operating system framework that would allow clear policies for data regulation, transparency, oversight, and address ownership issues. And with that, then we can start thinking about how we could potentially be evolving through clinical trials. First, start with computer vision challenges, going through multi-institutional collaborations, academia and industry working together, standards for publication. There is so many publications this day and age that has the AI name on it, but didn't actually even use any AI methodology on that. Then we go to validation studies to see what was developed in one lab center also is applicable in other laboratory. And of course, very important to promote diversity and understand bias. And then I end with this slide right here, that it always starts with the interaction between the patient and the clinician. It then becomes a data generation that's AI ready for research. Then we do the exploration of this data, go to validation studies, and then only then they're going to be ready for clinical trials. So all of that has to occur for us to be moving in this direction. And thanks for the opportunity to speak here today.
Thank you. Then, Leo, do you have any comment or question to the speakers?
Just a quick comment, and I think this was alluded to by Professor Blay earlier. Clinical trials like AI need to be repeated and updated. So beta blockers might have been shown to be highly effective for acute coronary syndrome in the 80s. It's possible that they may not be the best drugs now. So I think the idea that clinical trials are also not static and they have to be recalibrated and re-updated is a big challenge where AI could probably play a role. And I also wanted to introduce the concept of platform trial, which I'm hoping would get traction over time. So the platform trial was designed primarily to address that. With the platform trial, the trial doesn't end because the relationship between the interventions, the treatments, and patient factors with regard to an outcome constantly changes as practice patterns changes, as the demographics of the patient population change. So somehow we need to rethink the way we evaluate drugs or interventions because clinical trials, I think, is antiquated. Knowing that there will be changes in the efficacy, effectiveness of a drug over time, it means that we also perhaps should be planning for repeating clinical trials. But as we know, that's not feasible at all, economically or logistically. So maybe this is where AI could fit in. Maybe there should be more use of machine learning in what we call platform trials, which are ongoing perpetual trials. And I think this is where we need more brilliant minds from the audience, not just coming up with the next TPU or GPU or a new language model. We need people to rethink the systems and how to use data to redesign the systems of evaluation and monitoring of health products.
Thank you, Leo. So we understand that AI can help clinical trials, in particular phase 3 trials, to better select the patients for the treatment group and also to help to have synthetic control groups. Now, we used to have also some of the trials being the so-called phase 2 trials, no control group. So no control group, which means historical controls. What would be the place or remain the place of phase 2 trial in scope, in view of the use of AI now?
Maybe I can start. I think what Professor Alassonia was telling us was that we really need these type of trials right now, where when we have disease which have an incidence of less than 100 cases in a country like France per year, it's impossible to do a randomized study. Impossible to find enough patients to do them. So to demonstrate that something is better than the historical situation, we would need this type of tools. Otherwise, we will not be progressing. Simple as that.
I'm not really familiar with all phases, but what we can say is that every time you need to match one group with another, using the digital twin could be an idea as well. So if you take the example of the curve that I showed you, if we are able to say that we are sure, as we can be sure with a certain error that we control, of what is going to happen in a couple of years for the patient without treatment. You give him now the treatment. Since you know exactly the dynamic on which that person was, you can evaluate the distance of the new dynamic with respect to the one that you proposed before. So basically, you can say that the digital twin will be the person in the control arm that corresponds completely to the first one. So when you don't have enough patient, you can use the digital twin as its own placebo arm. So this is where we can play a role. I don't know if it's going to be in phase 2 or phase 3, but I think we can play here. In both? Okay. In phase 2? Okay.
If you need to be convinced about the potential benefit, I can just tell you a short story. As a GI oncologist, some years ago, trials proved the benefit of using targeted agents, cetuximab and bevacizumab, in patients with advanced colon cancer. Then there were trials to try to show if it was beneficial as adjuvant treatment, non-advanced treatment. There were 4 major trials, 3 others. A total of more than 10,000 patients were entered in this trial, many hundreds of millions of dollars, and all the trials were completely negative, all. So we hope that this will not happen in the future, because with the new technologies, we can probably prevent that. You believe it can be done?
Well, actually, I hope it's going to be this way. I hope the clinical trials in the future will rely on synthetic data or digital twins at some point.
So if I understand what all of you are saying, as an add-on to what, go ahead, Daniela. No.
After you.
No, please.
No, after you.
This is 2 colleagues fighting over who we should. So if I understand what all of you are saying, is that AI has a place if it can do things that we could otherwise not do. If it only does what we've already done, then we run the risk of recapitulating faulty data or of spending an excess amount of time. So what is it that you would require, especially the talks that each of you have given in different areas of AI, that we don't currently have in clinical trials? You spoke about your 4 rules, and Osnan, you did too, and Stephanie and Leo, but maybe each of you comment quickly.
There we go. Yeah, they're excellent questions. So, I mean, for us, at least in the surgical field right now, because it's kind of like a luxury that we have, because the field doesn't exist. So we're kind of creating the playbook on how to develop, the technology in the field. And while being advocated heavily, but over consensus experts, the meetings is about how can we create these standards, and then not just create these standards, but to validate these standards even before I start developing that. There's standards for actually acquiring the data. The standards are annotating the data, labeling the data. And if not just this, but also a way to export those standards so silos could actually get together, or either could be a digital twin of a surgical procedure. But for us, that's what we're doing at the moment. And the other thing that's very important that actually worries us is that what's going to happen with the governance that's going to surround all of this? Are we going to be allowed to then utilize everything being developed, or because we're going to be reimbursed, or because the government may put some regulations and then nothing's going to occur? That's a big worry for us.
One example, we often are in a situation where we have a drug which is treating a subtype, 1% of all cancers, say, where we do not have the natural history of this 1%, because they are discovered at the same time that we do the trial, the first trial, and the drug. How can we recapitulate the natural history of this disease, the subgroup of disease which was previously unknown? Coming back to the slides, molecular analysis or whatever, of the thousands of patients previously treated, we need that because we discover at the same time a treatment and a disease, and nobody, at least in this continent, is really convinced that we should have a demonstration without a randomized study, which is unfeasible.
So what do we need as a technician, I would say, the one that are doing the AI models, is reglementation. I would like to know what I can produce that will actually be accepted, will be used in terms of clinical trials and whatever else. But we for the moment do not have any legal borderline, so that we know exactly that if we develop something, this will be it for use. So what we would need us actually are just legal boundaries.
And just to echo that, we need a shift in the mindset. So right now we're getting a lot of resistance from the trialists who see us as competition and would try to say that AI and data science are merely hypothesis generating. And in the end, it still needs a traditional randomized control trial to figure out if something is effective or not. So somehow, how can we convince the medical institutions, the research institutions, that we need this tectonic shift in the way we evaluate products?
Daniela.
So my comment was actually related to the clinical trials and the extraordinary cost of clinical trials. And I wanted to give one concrete example, or maybe two examples from work done at MIT on this problem. So I would like to point to Professor Andrew Lo, who has been using machine learning to simplify the processes that go in clinical trials. And together with Andrew Lo and our students, we have essentially adopted the idea I have shown you intuitively about how you can debias facial data sets and turn it to debias clinical trials, so that the clinical trials that do not have an opportunity to yield good results do not get conducted. And so these are two concrete examples for how AI can help save money and make clinical trials more efficient.
Any other comment or question for the audience?
While we're waiting, then I do have a question. What you're talking about is revamping the way in which we practice interventions, surgery, medicine, and clinical trials. But it strikes me that what both of you said is that we need partnerships amongst people who are performing and evaluating the clinical trials. But those partners don't themselves know what they want. So how do we train people in the modern era? How do we train the new surgeon, the new clinical trialists to become valid partners? Training is already so extraordinarily long. Well, how would you change it?
So we call this cultural transformation, and we are working very hard to identify the stakeholders that should be involved, from including patient advocacy, organizations and patients themselves, medical students, like engineering students, the new generation that's growing, but at the same time, not to neglect the ones that are already practicing and already developing. How can they actually understand this? So from our surgical society standpoint, what we're putting together is a summit that's going to occur in the fall next year on surgical governance for data. And we're going to be bringing all of them together. It's not going to be just a summit to start. We're going to start prior to it, having like a bunch of in-person and virtual meetings in different tracks to identify what do we need to work together to come up with, at the end of a playbook that can actually give to the legislators and to the hospital administrators, well, how can we be moving this forward?
Jean-Yves, what would you suggest for Unicancer to change the future clinical trials according to the potential of AI?
Actually, the clinical trials that we are doing right now have been changing so rapidly that I don't think training the young is not going to be the difficult part, probably. It's more training the regulators, which is going to be challenging. Enabling them to accept that when I was young, clinical practice guideline lasted 10 years. Now they last 3 months. In this context, you really need to be flexible. And not only the researcher, which is by definition, who is flexible by definition, but the regulators as well. Otherwise, we'll miss the promises of precision medicine.
I mean, I think that training the young is not as straightforward. Convincing medical schools and nursing schools and pharmacy schools to have data science courses, it's still very challenging. And we need to design courses where the nursing, medical, pharmacy students are classmates with the engineers and the computer scientists, because there's very few of those classes. So again, it's thinking outside the box, trying to be more creative and more experimental with the way we train the next generation. And that's not so easy. People are going to resist that because it takes too much energy to rethink how do we educate the next group of students.
I just would like to mention what we've been doing in Université Paris-Cité. We have two programs where we propose to students some AI courses. It's really the basics. What is computer vision? What are the basics of machine learning? And actually, Emmanuel is doing one of these courses. Really, they are very keen on learning this because the young generation knows that there is a challenge there, and if they do not go there, they will miss it. So basically, we have pretty much too many people that want to attend this course rather than not enough. And at the other hand, we have also a master program when we put together engineers, business guys, business by training people, and medical doctors or pharmacists together to try to see what are the challenges of innovation and what will be the future of medicine with technology. And so since we are putting them all together, that first they speak a different language, so they have to adapt themselves and they have to face all the difficulties of what do we have to do in terms of business, but to have a business, we have to think about the technology, but we also have to think about the medical part, which includes all the regulation. So we have this master program, which is quite different from usual programs because we are not targeting one specific category of students, but a broad part of students. And again, this is a good thing to see that people are very enthusiastic about that program. So I hope young generation will adopt all this very easily.
Thank you. Any question? You are mute or oh yes, please.
Hello, yeah. I'm just wondering, because the question of means, if you look at what is at stake, really, if we can look at
Please,
what is at stake.
Close to the microphone, please.
Yeah, is that better? Okay. If you look at what is at stake, really, I mean, it's about health. It's about our lives, but it's also about, if you look at the economics of it, it's about 10 to 12% of our GDP. And if I look at the promises of what the technology can give, what digital twins can give to clinical trials, I think the means that are put behind are very, very limited. If I take the example of simulation modeling, what we've done for design for cars or planes, industry has put huge amounts of money to get that process and to get the real design processes to squeeze production, to optimize production. Pharmaceutical industry is putting the money on this? I'm not sure. I think it's time to do it. I mean, if the industry doesn't come in, I think with public money we can progress, but industry should come in with the money.
So I just want to be, I value your statement, but the question is, if I understand, if industry doesn't come along as a partner, then all of this is an academic exercise?
It will take time, more time. I think if industry comes in, it could accelerate the process.
So go ahead.
I mean, I do not disagree with your statement. And actually, there is so many examples that being true about it. One of them was how there was the introduction of robotic surgery. Robotic surgery has not yet to prove to show increase in outcomes. It doesn't improve outcomes, doesn't improve surgeons' performance. It's just level the playing field. And it still costs more money. So if, let's say, the NIH in the United States or the French government will be sponsoring development of robotic surgery, it wouldn't happen, right? So the hopes is, as we keep going along, that the new generation of the robots going to be cheaper, and then we're going to start seeing benefits. So I think we should be partnering with industry, but we should be mindful that we should be steering this boat with them, and if not for them. Otherwise, we're going to be then required to start utilizing products that have not been validated just because they're minimum viable products, has the AI name on it.
Okay, if we have no other question, we thank the panelists. This was very interesting. And maybe we convene in 1 or 2 years to see how we have progressed on this field. Thank you very much.
So we will invite then, Osnan, you come back. Well, we'll invite then to the last of the sessions on, now we're talking about computer human interactions, human-computer interaction. I just want to remind us what Professor Russ helped us to define, that AI, in some respects, is the partnership of humans and machine. The question is, how do they enhance each other? It's interesting, over 100 years ago, about 100 years ago, the EEG was discovered as a measurable issue, and it was used, or it was proposed to be used for diagnosis, but also fascinatingly at the time in 1924 for feedback and control. It took about 50 years, 1974, for Jacques Vidal to suggest that brain signals could be used for human-brain interaction, human-machine interaction. That was 50 years ago. So here we are, 50 years after that term was coined. And now we turn to esteemed colleagues, experts in the field, to tell us how machines can learn and how humans can learn from machines.
And the speakers are Bernard Biulac, who is a professor emeritus at the University of Bordeaux and a member of the Académie of Medicine, Rodana Meret, who was present in the previous panel, and Blaise Hiver, who is the research director at the Institute of Neurosciences in Grenoble. Bernard starts.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. So I will just recall you that the brain-computer interface designates a means of communication that use brain activity. This approach is carried out independently of peripheral nerves and muscle. The purpose of BCI is to provide the brain another means of communication, another intermediary under the control of the user. I will recall the major and principal experience of Fetz in 1969, who was the first to demonstrate that it was possible to interact on a device, it was a cursor, thanks to the soul, the unique activity of the neurons of the motor cortex, without going through the usual channel, that is the peripheral nerves and muscle. This is the basis of the implementation of numerous BCI. I just recall the 2 times of this experiment. In a first step, the monkey, he was working on a monkey, use a manipulandum to move. Use a manipulandum to. Oh. Sorry. Use a manipulandum to move. Sorry, to move his wrist, to move this cursor to the enlightened target in order to obtain a reward. In the same time, the unit activity of the motor cortex is recorded, and one can observe that this neural activity increased before the onset of movement. It is the support of the motor order. In a second time, the animal no longer operates with this upper limb, the wrist remain inert. And just with the unit activity of the motor cortex, he will move the cursor to the target to obtain the reward. This has been transferred to human and applied to human. And you can see here the same situation in human, where a subject has the intention to move, the will to act. Therefore, there is an increase of the neural activity of the motor cortex, which is collected by this array of microelectrodes, processed and translate in command signal. We will move the cursor on the video screen. I indicate here the different time of the step, of the different step of the operation of a BCI, the acquisition, the pre-processing, the extraction, the signal classification, the translation into command control of device, and what is very important, the perceptual feedback, which is necessary to see if there is an error in the program executed, and also for the training, There is two categories, one distinguished, two categories of BCI. One that are called reading BCI and the other writing BCI. The reading BCI uses cerebral activity to implement devices that supplement the motor function, more particularly as we see cursor, but also, as you can see here, wheelchair, robotic arm or robotic hand, and also in situation of very big severe disability, like in the locked-in syndrome, in ALS, advanced ELLA, a word speller, a matrix speller. It is also interesting to mention that other techniques can be used, like neurofeedback, to treat various pathology like ADHD in the kids, but also in some limit, with some limit, depression or insomnia. Globally, the cerebral activity collected concerns the action potential of the motor cortex in the majority of the case, but this technique is quite invasive. That's why one prefers, when it is possible, EEG activity, and more particularly, evoke potential like the P300 wave, chiefly in the case of matrix speller. The other kind of BCI, the writing BCI, use electrical stimulation to transmit a signal to the brain tissue. This is a case of cochlear implant, of retinal implant, and deep brain stimulation. Let us see a first case, a first example of exoskeleton. It is a case of tetraplegia with a C4, C5 level, who is inserted, strapped into an exoskeleton entirely motorized, and the subject has microelectrode implanted in the motor cortex, in the two motor cortex. These signals are collected by, as you can see here, this electrode, this grid, this array of electrode. The signal is transmitted by wireless connection to a backpack computation station, which is able to send command to the different parts of the exoskeleton. This exoskeleton is able to make bimanual and polyarticular movement with 8 degrees of liberty. At the level of the lower limb, it is much more simple. It is a robotic human working, which can be triggered with two common possible, I walk or I stop. But you see that the situation is very difficult since the subject has neither tone nor equilibrium or postural activity. So it is necessary to resort to a suspension system. Another case is maybe much more interesting for the future. It is the use of a pattern support of locomotion in the case to control a robotic arm, in the case of amputation. This group, the group of Jaracé and the team Agathe of the INSERM in Paris, has imagined to use what they call the human body language. To this end, when the subject decide to guide the prosthetic toward a target, they decipher, thanks to sensor placed on the side of the amputed arm, sensor which permit to detect this pattern of motor coordination at the level of the stump, at the level of the upper part of the limb and the torso. So they re-inject this pattern into the robotic arm, which is able to decipher, to interpret, and to complete the natural movement. Furthermore, it is interesting since they work on the capacity of integrate the robotic part into a sensory feedback, a sensory loop to create a feedback. I will, to conclude, let's mention another kind of writing BCI. It is a case of artificial retina. The retinal implant chiefly conducted this work by the group of CSAIL in Paris, which consists in a certain vision loss like AMD or retina pigmentosa, where you have an alteration of the photoreceptor to reintroduce visual information into neural circuit via chips, via electronic chips implanted in epi or under retina. These permit to increase, to ameliorate the vision, but with certain limit. The case of deep brain stimulation, where the high frequency stimulation is applied to a certain number of targets, allows to improve, in certain cases, the Parkinson's disease and certain movement disorder, and also can be used in certain cases in mental disease like OCD or depression or Tourette syndrome. I will mention also the electrical stimulation of spinal locomotor network in certain paraplegia, which are conducted by Courtine in Lausanne. Finally, now I let Blaise Hiver speak about the speech BCI.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for this nice invitation and this nice workshop. So, so speech BCIs are a particular case of communication BCIs that are intended to allow a person with very severe paralysis to control a system to communicate using brain activity directly. And it can be achieved using non-invasive approaches such as EEG, for example. And the outcome here is allows to spell a few letters per minute by using a system that allows to click letters on a screen from the brain activity. And the other way is to use intracortical, so brain implants that are sort of invasive approach using brain implants that are implanted either inside the cortex, like here, or over the cortex. And here you have an example of a series of studies by Brown University and Stanford, where they show that it's possible for this lady to select letters on a screen with a rate of about 40 characters per minute using an intracortical array inside the motor cortex that controls movement of a cursor on a screen. And a further study by this group shows that asking a person to imagine writing can be also, it's a good strategy, and the hand trajectory imagined by the person who is attempting to write letters can be decoded using deep learning. And then it's possible to achieve a rate of about 90 characters per minute, so about twice as fast. And for reference, typing on a text on a mobile phone is about 100 and 150 characters per minute. So it's close to this type of rate. But still, it's far from a very natural communication, and the speech BCIs intend to use directly brain activity recording from speech areas, and especially speech sensory motor areas, and to decode in real time this activity using nowadays deep learning to control speech synthesizer. So I've put here a video showing what is possible to do at the moment, and this is a nice study by UCSF. And you will hear sentences that is reconstructed from brain activity, and then the same sentence originally spoken by the person. These are epileptic patients who can speak, and the data is used to try to see if it's possible to decode brain activity into speech. And then you will hear again the same sentence that is reconstructed. Hope the sound works. Oops, okay, so the sound doesn't work. Yes.
Vous pouvez lancer
yes, okay.
Okay.
So they are decoding articulatory movements, and then they transform the articulatory movements into speech. Okay. So we don't have the sound, so it's this. Okay, so trust me, it's pretty intelligible. And on the right, there are spectrograms of sounds that are from our team, where we are reconstructing. These are vowels. So the top row is the original sound, and the bottom row is the sound that is reconstructed using deep learning from activity of the cortex. It will come. Okay. So this was offline decoding. So it means that data was acquired, then took home, then deep networks were trained on this data to see if speech could be reconstructed. And last year, there was a study by the USF team reporting closed loop speech reconstruction from brain activity in a paralyzed person. And they show that, in fact, by introducing a restricted set of words that can be produced, and a restricted number of sentences, and constraining this using further models on top of deep learning, then that rates of about 10 to 15 words per minute could be decoded. So I will end here and with a few current directions. And the next step is to allow real-time intelligible audio synthesis. In this study, it was still text on a screen, so we need to remove the screen now. Oops, sorry. And for that, I need to have a system that can be used in a day life environment, everyday life. Then we need brain implants that are compatible with this, so that allow very long-term chronic recordings that are stable and resolved enough to obtain satisfactory results, and fully implantable with wireless communication with the outside the head. So typically, this is the implant that is developed by CEA, which is a good candidate, and that Bernard already introduced previously with the exoskeleton. and of course improving AI-based speech decoders. And there is also some ethical aspects that can that need to be addressed to make the devices acceptable by both the user and also society, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Blaise. Ozanan, any comments?
Thank you. I think this is fascinating. I can even imagine like how can we apply to my field in robotic surgery. The day that we can start also thinking and the robot be acting, or we start be getting some tactile feedback. That's something that we don't get at the moment. But I think that this is just fascinating in general, and how could we even start moving the field forward with adding more research and machine learning, to rehabilitations and so on and so forth. This speech is another that's like fantastic.
So I have a question for all of you. This is fascinating and it's futuristic. Do you envision a day when machines will make all of us better clinicians and surgeons and interventionalists, where we'll wear machines when we do procedures or when we see patients, and they'll help us both in terms of the guide paths that you alluded to and then to this fascinating work? Will the position of a future be a cyborg?
Yes, it is not absolutely for tomorrow. Of course, you see the exoskeleton of Penamid. We are very far of the final situation. You have to miniaturize, you have to create a real feedback. You have to suppress the suspension system. Of course, it is necessary to continue to work very hard, but it is not so simple.
Don't you think we should also be careful about what the technique allows? Because maybe we could consider we are here to repair human being, but not to augment human being. What do you think?
Yes. Actually, we have been thinking about this, and we are augmenting people who are disabled. Well, we are trying to. So, and we don't really repair actually the lost function. I mean, the network are still damaged. The lesion is still there. So maybe we can talk about compensation. And I think if we at least achieve good results with this system, then I think we are already satisfied. We are far away from reproducing naturalistic performance.
Yes, please.
Yes, I think there is a quite difference between, for instance, an exoskeleton and a robotic hand or a robotic arm. I think progress will go really further, and I think quickly in for this kind of prosthesis. For exoskeleton, full exoskeleton in tetraplegia, it is much more difficult. And there is another point also I want to put forward, is for the what we call the writing BCI, the one where you stimulate, you send signal in the CNS, like in deep brain stimulation. The stimulation we apply is very monotonous. It is always the same. It is about 120 hertz. So you have no particular value in terms of coding in what you inject. You inject something which improves the dynamic of the basal ganglia network, but it is not so precise, but it gives good result in Parkinson, chiefly in hypertonia and akinesia. But it is like that. It is not so. We have no precise explanation.
Are there any burning questions? Yes.
So I have a question for both of you. We just gave the presentation. Is that this is amazing, the fact that we're capable to use a biological, human brain to control a, machine, like a pure like silicon. The question is, should we, or are we also focusing on not just replacing the entire body with a cyborg, but actually just to bypass the lesion on the spinal cord, that we're going to be transferring the information to the remaining and maintain the most beautiful thing that we have, our muscles, our tendons, our tactile feedback?
Yeah, this is very important. And in fact, the answer is yes. So there is a bunch of studies focusing on controlling functional electrical stimulation of the peripheral nerves or muscles from brain activity. So this is one. And also Bernard mentioned the nice study of Edouard Courtinti in EPFL, and where they use stimulation of the spinal cord to restore locomotion in paraplegic people, and they use clever spatiotemporal patterns of stimulation depending on what the person wants to do, if it's cycling, swimming, or hiking, or standing. And now the focus is on using brain implants to control this stimulation in a seamless approach. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. I think thank you. This was a very interesting panel also, and thank you for your participation. So we will end this panel, and please don't leave. May I ask Daniela and Emmanuel to come on stage? For the concluding remarks by Elazar. And don't leave, there's a buffet dinner, which is for 150 persons. So there's plenty of food, I think. So be ready.
Thank you. So I'm going to make this extremely quick. First, to thank all of you for being here. Second, to thank these organizers who have worked so very hard, the staff and the people. I won't list names because I will first mispronounce everybody's names. Second, forget people's names. But what I will say is that science advances only in an open forum, and there is no better forum than this beautiful building and this extraordinary room in which to do that. Second, that we live in a global community. All challenges are global. And so it may very well be that AI is premature, but if anything has come, this binational collaboration, this extraordinary friendship of people, and this amazing family of investigators who have come together to solve these problems. And then I'm going to skip over what I had prepared, which is a summary of the day, but just to say that the future will have AI in medicine. It's a declarative statement, not a question. I won't go through what we've learned, but I do want to conclude with one story of a hero of mine. René Laennec invented the stethoscope in 1816. It changed forever medicine as we know it. In 1816, nobody but René Laennec knew how to use the stethoscope. Physicians were envious, suspicious, and felt like they were going to lose their livelihood. Patients thought that the stethoscope was sucking their soul out of their bodies. And what it required was for the next 3 years for Laennec to write this incredible book. It's a remarkable book, 767 pages, of which 77 talk about the stethoscope. And the rest, almost other 700 pages, talk about what we learned from the stethoscope. That's our obligation. As Farhad told us, it's a journey, it's not an end. AI is a tool. it will teach us. It's our obligation, all of us in this room, to teach the world. It is, though, and there is a very bitter lesson to be learned. Laennec died of tuberculosis at the age of 45, very likely by using his stethoscope on many patients with tuberculosis. So technology has a dark side to it, and we need to be careful because we can not only hurt ourselves, we can hurt other people as well. So with this, I turn to my collaborators, friends, and co-organizers to ask for final words from each of them.
Well, so I shall start. So I would like to thank, of course, all the organizers. I know it was a lot of work making all people all together and gather. I mean, what you don't know, the behind the scene is that we've been discussing for, I don't know, I mean, we've met about 2 years ago, maybe, something like that, but we've never seen each other. I mean, Bernard, you saw Daniela, but I've never met. So it's a pretty big human experience also to be, meeting people you've been working for such a long time. And maybe I wish that AI will keep humanity in all applications, and it will not be about just techniques. Thank you.
Thank you for staying with us all day today and contributing, speakers and participants. I think there is enormous possibility for AI for the future. Elazar, I'm very moved by the example you shared with us. Four of us have gotten to know each other so well, and it's so wonderful to finally be here together in this majestic building. I look forward to continuing the conversation. And let me say that the United States and Europe have so much in common, and yet different perspectives. We have so much to learn from each other. Best practices are different depending on the tasks. So I really wish to see some concrete action that all of us can undertake to bring together some of the ideas we've discussed today, but maybe even others that are inspired by our discussions. So if I had a glass of champagne, I would raise it to more US, France, and US, Europe collaborations in AI in medicine.
Just a short word. It was a lot of fun to organize this meeting, and we became more and more good friends, talk to each other over the telephone, on WhatsApp very regularly. And I must say for the Academy of Medicine that it's the Academy is very happy to have hosted such a prestigious guest as you are. And we hope we can go on with future collaboration. And we spoke of AI in clinical trial. I've been struggling long part of my life to try to organize international clinical trials. And maybe with AI, we can go on and increase the cooperation, not only within Europe, but both sides of the Atlantic also.